leave it up to you. So
yes, please. It is a bit strange, but I really appreciate it very, very much.
Sure. Okay, so there. So my paper, I called it Language in Dante's Divine Comedy, the Place of Praise in Paradiso. So as Dante travels with Beatrice through the 9 spheres of heaven in Paradiso, he meets his great-great-grandfather Cacciaguida in the sphere of Mars. And in this sphere, he hears language that he does not understand. First, by the souls who form a cross and sing a hymn, and then secondly, by his ancestor Cacciaguida. So while the souls in heaven have knowledge through their vision of God, not from speaking with each other, it may seem that language is not necessary to paradise. But Cacciaguida's unintelligible speech shows that heavenly language exists and that it expresses what the souls know through their vision of God, a knowledge that exceeds mortal understanding. But instead of speaking to communicate thought, Cacciaguida praises God, expressing his love. Because the language of paradise expresses what is known through the vision of God, Dante indicates that the highest point of human speech is the expression of love by articulating the being of another through praise. When Cacciaguida first approaches Dante, he introduces himself in Latin, but then is so overcome with love that he speaks in a language that Dante cannot understand. As Cacciaguida's speech descends, Dante begins to understand him. The first thing that he understands is Cacciaguida's praise of the Trinity. Next, Cacciaguida says that he had desired to meet Dante, a meeting he knew would happen through his vision of God, whom he calls that great volume. Cacciaguida then praises Beatrice, and he ends his speech by answering Dante's unspoken conjecture and inviting him to ask his questions. Cacciaguida's unintelligible speech comes at an ironic moment in the poem. Dante has just looked at Beatrice after hearing Cacciaguida's greeting, and at the sight of her beauty and smile, he thinks that he has touched the height of both his blessedness and paradise, although he is only in the fifth sphere of Mars. Cacciaguida's language reveals that there are more things so glorious that they exceed Dante's understanding, and consequently offers correction to Dante's thought. Dante's inability to understand Cacciaguida's speech is not because Cacciaguida speaks another language, but because his speech is of things that are beyond his understanding. A foreign language is not understood because the words, the sensible sounds the speaker says, are unknown, but the concepts the person expresses are ideas that the listener is familiar with, or at least is able to know. In contrast, the subject matter of Cacciaguida's speech is beyond mortal intellection, but as it descends to meet the limits of our intellect, Dante understands it. The poet uses this word descends to show continuity between Cacciaguida's speech and the Italian language. They are the same kind of language. Therefore, Cacciaguida's speech is incomprehensible to Dante because, while it's in a language Dante knows, the knowledge expressed is higher than Dante's understanding. Dante acknowledges that his mind is finite, and what Cacciaguida says is simply beyond his capacity to know. He says that Cacciaguida added to his first words things that were too deep to meet my understanding. Dante is unable to understand Cacciaguida's speech because his knowledge is limited, and it is limited because he knows by his senses and by reason. In his unfinished work, De Vulgaria Eloquentia, on the vernacular language, Dante argues that language communicates ideas from one person to another. It has a dual aspect as being both sensible and intellectual. The listener both hears the sounds of language and understands its meaning. Although language does not perfectly communicate a person's ideas, Dante's poet of the Commedia finds language inadequate to communicate the glories of paradise. It is a reliable expression of ideas from one person to another. Cacciaguida's incomprehensible speech communicates what he knows, because human nature was created to speak, according to Dante, but it expresses what the mind intellects, not knows by the senses or reason. And then, just as an aside, I realize I'm not using the terms intellection and reason as philosophically precise as I would like to. But I'm using these terms because of how I've read Dante or Thomas Aquinas in the past. So mortal humans know by their senses or through reason. And reason is the mind's deduction of conclusions based on first principles. On the other hand, intellection is the mind's instantaneous grasp of truth. Intellection occurs as the souls in paradise see the beatific vision and mentally grasp the truths within God. Although the soul's intellection is not infinite, the truth it grasps surpass what can be known by reason, which is more limited in its knowledge. A language that communicates what is intellected is therefore higher than that which communicates mere reason. Cacciaguida's incomprehensible language is an expression of knowledge known by his intellection. It is different from natural language, but is continuous with it. It's not another language, but is the ability to say true things about what the soul intellects. So in paradise, the soul's intellect the pilgrim's thought directly without his having to speak. Dante writes that Beatrice read me as I read myself, and she speaks Dante's thoughts before he can. The word read indicates Beatrice's understanding of Dante's own thoughts before he puts them into words. She sees and reads his soul. Yet the souls in paradise not only see the thoughts within Dante's mind, but they see his thoughts as they are reflected in God himself. Dante conjectures in his mind that Cacciaguida's sight of the beatific vision is the way that he knows Dante's thoughts. And without Dante speaking, Cacciaguida tells Dante that this conjecture is correct. He says, "You think your thoughts flow into me from him," and then confirms, "Your thought is true. For both the small and great of this life gaze into that mirror where, before you think, your thoughts have been displayed." Because God is the creator, God's mind is a mirror in which all creation is reflected, even the thoughts of human beings. And the souls that have the beatific vision can read the thoughts of others as they are reflected in God. If language exists to communicate one person's thought to another through sensible means, and if the souls in paradise intellect each other's thoughts directly, we might ask whether language properly exists in paradise. If the souls are not speaking to Dante, who needs them to speak because he only knows their thoughts through their speech, would they speak at all? But because Cacciaguida speaks about something beyond Dante's understanding, means that his language, at least, is proper to paradise. The glorious things in paradise can be understood by the intellect of the immortal beings there and expressed by them in speech. Furthermore, since the poet does not include a translation for the benefit of his readers, we don't need to know what Cacciaguida says or the sounds he uses, but that he speaks and is able to express the glories of what he knows of paradise. His language is particular to paradise. Since Cacciaguida's unintelligible speech is a heavenly language, but contiguous with it, or contiguous with Italian, his opening speech to Dante reveals a hierarchy of language in which praise is the highest type of language. When his speech descends from its highest level of expression into that which Dante can understand, Cacciaguida is praising God and speaking of the Trinity, a theological mystery. Dante writes, "These were the first words where I caught the sense. Blessed be you, both three in one, who show such favor to my seed." The order of Cacciaguida's speech is hierarchical because it descends from things that exceed Dante's intelligence to what he understands, and from praise to an expression of knowledge. Cacciaguida's first subject is the heavenly mysteries beyond mortal comprehension, then praise of the mysteries expressible in human language, the Trinity and the beatific vision. Cacciaguida then praises Beatrice as a created being before his speech descends to transmit knowledge to Dante by answering his questions. If Cacciaguida is speaking high praise in his unintelligible speech, then language in paradise is proper because it is not a communication of one's knowledge, but an expression of love. Since the souls in paradise intellect each other's thoughts, they have no need to communicate their ideas to one another in speech. Instead, they speak to express their love. And they do this by speaking heavenly mysteries, which is knowledge of God's being. The articulation of being from a person whose will is turned towards God is praise because there is saying what is true of the ultimate good. The language of praise in Paradiso is both the expression of the being of the beloved and it's of love given towards the beloved. Because the will is the gatekeeper of a person's love, when the will is directed towards God, it also directs a person's love towards God. And since God is the being who is the ultimate good, when a person's love is directed to God, his language articulates mysteries of God's being because God is the aim of his love. Cacciaguida's his intelligible praise of God is not only in saying, "Blessed are you," but also naming God, both three in one. Cacciaguida's Paradiso language, which is unintelligible to Dante, might be an even higher level of praise beyond the Trinity, because he is able to intellect the mysteries of God's being that exist beyond human understanding. Since his language can express his intellection, the language of his praise of God is higher than mortals can understand. So Cacciaguida's praise is love. The poet's metaphor of the bow and arrow, or the bow and target, show how Cacciaguida expresses his love in Paradiso language. So when Cacciaguida, quote, conceived beyond a mark a mortal mind can reach, the poet is using a metaphor of an archer bending his bow to hit a target. Cacciaguida's mind conceives the deep truths that he wants to say with his language, just as an archer sees the target he aims at. But his bow of burning sympathy has to slacken to reach a target that is within the capabilities of Dante's mind. The poet says that what propels Cacciaguida's speech is burning sympathy. Cacciaguida speaks from his love. In the metaphor, the bow slackens to reach a closer target as Cacciaguida's love calms to express something that is intelligible to Dante. The language of praise is a proper action in paradise because it is an action of giving one's love, which is in accord with a rightly ordered will. When a person receives knowledge by intellection, the act of speaking is lost. But expressing praise in language is the human action of continuing to give love to the beloved. This action is necessary for a will that is rightly ordered to God. Dante begins Canto 15 contrasting generous will, which freely gives its love, with contorted will, which is greedy because it subsumes all things into itself. Generous will is the motivation for love of God and requires praise of God. Although God's knowledge of a person's mind and will is perfect, giving love through language is a proper act. Because all things in paradise point to God insofar as they are created by him and in alignment with his will, proper praise of other beings in paradise is ultimately praise of God. Praising other beings is appropriate use of language, as Bernard's prayer to Mary illustrates. Bernard's prayer begins with the expression of paradoxes of Mary's being as Virgin Mother, daughter of your Son, humble and sublime. These paradoxes are mysteries of who Mary is, and in expressing them, Bernard expresses proper praise of her, just as Cacciaguida's expression of the Trinity is praise of God. The expression of love from one person is not only a self-giving, but it leads to the increase of love in others who overhear the praise. Bernard's prayer to Mary is for Dante's sake, so that his love may follow Bernard's speech. Bernard exhorts Dante, "Do you follow me with your affection? So may my words in your heart share one way." Just as Dante is in Purgatorio, is one who spoke when love moved him, so now in Paradiso, he loves as Bernard speaks. Likewise, Cacciaguida's invitation to Dante to speak, although he already knows his thoughts, shows that Dante's speech is also proper to Paradise, because it is his love. Cacciaguida tells Dante, "Let your voice, bold, assured, and glad, proclaim your will and longing." Because of the relationship of love to the will, Cacciaguida encourages Dante to speak of his love, because his speech will increase Cacciaguida's own love. So Dante begins the Paradiso with an invocation to Apollo and a hope that it will enkindle prayer in the reader. He ends the Paradiso with an invocation to God, directly requesting his help to find the language in which to express God's being in the final images of the poem. "Make my tongue so powerful," Dante prays, "that I may leave to people of the future one gleam of the glory that is yours." Just as Dante sees the beatific vision, he prays that his poem will become light, that God's glory will gleam in it as a mere gleams, for his readers to have their own vision of God. Dante's expression of the mysteries of God's being in the final canto is praise of God. It turns the Paradiso's opening invocation of prayer into a final act of praise. The entire Divine Comedy culminates in the beatific vision expressed in the language of praise, as the poet puts images of God's being into words, and the poem is complete as it enkindles praise of God in the reader. I think you're muted.
Oh, wonderful, I said. Thank you very much. Yeah, wonderful. Robin sends us a message. Move to another session. We are checking the backwalder, but feel free to do whatever feels right to you about ending. Okay. What usually is done during the sessions, have you seen already and visited already sessions? Yeah, because usually first the texts are read, and then we see and talk about possible combinations or well things that important to enlighten in both presentations or questions. And so how would we do it now?
That sounds good to me. If you want
Yeah.
to.
Well, perhaps it is interesting when I read my text now, and we do that. We try to find similarities or yeah. Okay. So my text is about the consolation of the union with the beloved one, and it is one chapter of the Ring of the Dove. The Ring of the Dove, Tawk al-Hamama in Arabic, was written around 1020 by Ibn Hazm, who was born at Cordoba at the end of the 10th century, and he died on half of the 11th century. He is seen as the greatest scholar of Muslim Spain. He might have written 400 volumes, and his works include compositions on this Islamic law, theology, heresiography, history and ethics, as well as does his work on the Ring of the Dove, phenomenology of love. He received a good education in both the religious and secular sciences, and so he was for the sciences of the ancients, which include logic, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and other sciences. Although he was one of the most prolific writers in the Islamic world, very few of his works have come to light today since they were burned by his opponents. About his works putting into flames, Ibn Hazm remarks that the paper you may burn, but what the paper holds you cannot burn. It is safe within my breast. Where I remove it goes with me. Alights when I alight, and in my tomb will lie. The ring of the dove becomes representative of profane and courtly love in the Eastern literature. Thereby, it contributes much to the studies on relationships between the medieval Eastern and Western literature. With this modern point of view, Ibn Hazm dares to question the dogmas of his religion and sincerely depicts earthly love with all its dimensions through his keen observations in his conservative society. The Ring of the Dove is regarded as a masterpiece and a milestone of the culture of Muslim Spain, through which one can have valuable insights into the intimate life of Cordoba of the 11th century. The title, The Ring of the Dove, is very significant as the dove's necklace stands for the feathers around the neck of the doves, and in the classical Arabic literature, it symbolizes the chain of love which is worn around the neck till one's death. It was found out that the doves have a specific ring around their necks called magnetite or magnetite, which works like a compass and helps the doves to find their ways. In the work, Ibn Hazm deals with love, its nature, its symptoms, its causes, fault finding, slandering, union, loyalty, betrayal, separation, oblivion, illicit practices, etc. It has been widely translated into European languages. When he was 28 years old, he wrote The Ring of the Dove, and by then he had not only lost his younger brother and father because of the plague in Cordoba at the time he was 18 years old, but he also had to seek several times refuge. The first time he fled to Almeria when a violent regime change took place in Cordoba, and at the age of 20 he lost a girl, also due to severe illness he was extremely much in love with, and vice versa. And at the age of 24 years old, he was imprisoned and then banished from the province of Almeria. He then fled to Valencia, and from there he went together with the Umayyad Caliph to Granada, where he was captured and imprisoned again. After his release, he returned after 6 years to Cordoba, and back here he became a vizier at the court of another Umayyad ruler. And that only took 7 weeks enjoyment of this turn to fortune, for this ruler was assassinated then, and he himself was put in jail again. Nevertheless, it was in Cordoba that he wrote his first and only elegant and high-standing literary work, The Ring of the Dove. And I find it quite remarkable when we realize that he was, despite these many painful experiences he also testifies of is in the book, at the same time able to write such a beautiful work. Would we be able to do so under those circumstances? I question myself. In the beginning of the chapter on the Union, he writes, quote, open, were it not that this world below is a transitory abode of trial and trouble, and paradise a home where virtue receives its reward, secure from all annoyances, I would have said that union with the beloved is that pure happiness which is without alloy and gladness unsullied by sorrow, the perfect realization of hopes and the complete fulfillment of one's dreams, quote, close. Ibn Hazm writes in a very wonderful, close way and comes close to the reader on an experiential level, I would say, when he further tells, quotes open, I have tested all manners of pleasures and known every variety of joy, and I found that neither intimacy with princes, nor wealth acquired, nor finding after lacking, nor returning after long absence, nor security after fear, and repose in a safe refuge, none of these things so powerfully affects the soul as union with the beloved, especially if it comes after long denial and continual banishment. For then the flame of passion waxes exceeding hot, and the furnace of yearning blazes up, and the fire of eager hope rages ever more fiercely. In the chapter, he illuminates more perspectives on hardships before or related to the union with the beloved. There is a longing and waiting for the union itself. Quote open, long she denied my heart's desire. Then, so ardent kisses pressed upon my lips, and that all the fire of love rekindled in my breast. Quote close. And there is also to the union itself attributed hardship. Quote open, some say that union too long enjoyed is fatal to love. That is a vile doctrine, advanced only by those who quickly tire of a sweet romance. On the contrary, the longer the union lasts, the firmer the attachment becomes. Quote close. Of course, there is the invariably painful rule of this transient world, being parted by death, and there is the anxiety of the lover over the beloved. I have been told, quote open, that by a woman in whom I have every confidence, that she once saw a youth and a maiden, each excessively passionate for the other, who were come together joyously in a certain spot. The youth had in his hand a knife with which he was cutting some fruit. He pressed with it too hard and inflicted a light wound on his thumb, which began to bleed. Now the girl was wearing a silk jacket of gold tissue, very costly. She, with a quick turn of her hand, tore off a strip of her precious material and bound up the boy's thumb with it. For a lover to act like this is a small matter compared with his proper obligations. It is a bounden duty, a law requiring his obedience. And indeed, how should it be otherwise, seeing that he has devoted his life and bestowed his soul as an offering to the beloved? And how can he refuse anything after yielding these? Quote close. Throughout the book, Ibn Hazm also tells about examples of various types of forbidden, secret, and religiously unlawful types of love. Sometimes these give even more consolation and pleasure than lawful ones. At the end of the chapter on union, he tells us, quote open, sometimes union is found to be so pleasurable and the lovers' hearts are in such perfect concord that they act quite recklessly, paying no heed to any who may reprove them, taking no care to conceal their attachment from any guardian, and troubling not at all if the talebearer be at work. Indeed, in such circumstances, reproach acts as a positive incitement. Close quote. Reading this in a certain way timeless, beautiful, and humorous court text about love can be a great consolation, I think, during the difficult times as we experience now globally. Also, the understanding, compassionate, and amic way, or what this book is called the phenomenology of love, Ibn Hazm writes about all these forms of love embedded in the worrisome human condition. And this gives us an empathic finesse, I would say. And that was my presentation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. You're welcome. And thank you for listening. So yeah, let's see how um, yeah, how could we find some same cue, or do we have questions? It is strange like this, but still fun. Don't you think so? Yeah. Yeah.
I had questions. So you were talking about, or what is it? It's Ibn Hazm is his name?
Yeah, Ibn Hazm.
Yeah. Um, so he was talking about how love gives consolation in hardship.
Yeah.
Uh, and do you think that hardship increases, like the harder one's life is in the world? Does that increase the pleasure of love, according to him, or does it increase our knowledge of the pleasure of love? So is there like this inverse relationship of the harder it is, the more your pleasure of love grows?
Well, interesting question. I think that from his own experience, uh, well, the way he tells all those stories about love, and he gives a typology of love on so much from within, that it doesn't only give more knowledge about the pleasurable side of life, but also it ameliorates, I think, I would say, the pleasure. And although I have the feeling that he was a really great theologian, theologian, how do you say?
Theologian.
Yeah, theologian. And uh, he was quite um, oh well, I might I mean this. He, although he's describing all kinds of earthly love, I think that um, taking into account all the hardships he suffered from himself, love has certainly also a spiritual meaning for him, although he stresses all the time the profane character of love. But that is so intermingled, and then in a spiritual way, I would say that he um, yeah, love increases the spiritual knowledge as well, and uh, and and well, earthly pleasure, but also spiritual sides of earthly pleasure, I would say. Yeah, and that might be an interesting connection as well to your uh, piece, because I found it very interesting how you are what you said about the various levels and categories of speech, and um, how the language of prayer is then in the way. So there is perhaps the connection between the two. That it is not Dante is not uh, pointing at earthly love so much, and there's no question of that in your case. But on the other hand, it is also in the way you work out the language and the speech. Um, it is also as one of the senses, or one of the it is also embodied, I would say, also of the souls in paradise. You're muted.
Sorry.
Oh no, oh no.
I
How do you see that?
yeah, I think that's very true, because the Dante, he's meeting all the all the souls in paradise, but he knows that they all will get their bodies back.
Yeah.
And then because he's saying that language is continuous, I don't think that he in any way denies the pleasure of the body when it's rightly ordered,
Mm-hmm.
at the right time in the right way. The body is is pleasurable, and it's also used in expressing love. And um, I think that's essential to him. I think that to deny the pleasures of the body would be to deny the actual spiritual part of love. Like
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
no being.
Those are intermingled. Yeah. And that is interesting because in your and in the Divine Comedy, it is not that explicitly worked out. And in the Ring of the Dove, the spiritual part is not explicitly worked out, but you can both read it in both ways, I would say, and understand that the author is very much conscious about that. Wouldn't you? Yeah.
Yeah, because one thing that I noticed when you were giving your paper is just the paradisal, or the transcendent aspect of love.
Yeah.
Because you were talking about the hardship here, it's kind of like
Yeah.
purgatorio in this world. I'm not
Yeah.
sure he would say that, but then like the union is something that transcends.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And that is yeah, wonderful. Huh? Yeah. Yeah. As a notion, and also as a knowledge. I would in your question. Yeah.
I also wanted to just say how that quote that you read about the girl who tore off her dress
Yeah.
to bind his hand. Um, and that seems to me about how like the two worlds interact, because she's in the world of love, but she's also in like this world of hardship, and there's just no comparison between the two. Her expensive dress is nothing
Yeah.
because of the love. There, it has to be given.
And that is where the material world uh, is still there, but stops in a way to be important at least. And where he calls it also her obligations, her obedience to the laws of love, and yeah, yeah, that's true. Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah. What I also was interested in your you were talking about the paradox, um, in the and perhaps I didn't understand it that well, but you meant also the paradox of the Trinity, didn't you? Or what? Yeah. So that is also what Dante is famous for, isn't that? That he um, uh, that he yeah, not really questioned, but that he was giving his thoughts on how also the same question perhaps as what we were talking before, if where the earthly world, um how the earthly world and the paradise, where they touch, and that is considered in the context of the Trinity. Isn't that true? That is what I thought. And could you explain perhaps some more about the paradox?
Yeah. So I'm just trying to recollect here. Um, so the way I read it, and I could be wrong, of course. I probably am. But the way I read it um, is that the Trinity is something that we have language for, but it's actually beyond Dante's
And
knowledge
intellection. Yeah.
of what it is. And so it's a mystery of God's being.
Yeah.
You can use this term for the Trinity, but you don't actually know what it means. So
Yeah.
I think that he would see the Trinity as the highest thing that can be expressed in language, because it's so high, that we have language for it, but it's a mystery because it's beyond our knowledge to actually know. And then when Cacciaguida speaks, I think that his speeches, he knows even more mysteries of God. And so his
Yeah.
speech is up here. And then when it descends first into that Trinity. And that's the highest thing that Dante can catch. He can like hear and understand. And then it descends even farther. The speech descends even farther down. Um, yeah. So I don't know. I don't know if that answers your question or not. You might have been seeing something that I didn't even think of. So.
No, and I thought that previously I have been I didn't read the Divine Comedy, so I saw some plays and so um and I thought that um, perhaps he was also um, uh, on this high level, that he was also um, uh, well, as for instance in the Eastern Christianity, one of the main questions of Orthodox Greece um, Grecian Orthodoxy, but also in several Christian denominations from the eastern part of the world. Um, uh, there is the question about the body of Christ, and within the Trinity um, concept. And I was thinking perhaps you are also pointing at these questions. I don't know. So perhaps was that also in the paradox? That was a question. Yeah.
I would love to talk about it because I understand more now where the question's coming from.
Yeah.
And it wasn't something that I've considered. But when Dante sees, so he puts the Trinity into images at the end, and he
Yeah.
includes the figure of the man within within God, because
Okay.
of the incarnation. So what you're
Yeah.
saying is exactly correct. Um, I'm trying to think how that would. I'm not sure how that would necessarily fit. Um, but it's really lovely. This idea there's this complete union of heaven
Yeah.
and of
Yeah.
God.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's really,
And well, yeah, it is. It would be interesting to dive more into that. I'm going to do that because it's yeah, it might be from um yeah, I don't know enough about it, but I know that for instance you have the monophysical interpretation in Eastern Christianity, which is about this um yeah, paradox, and that is one of the dogmas of founding another denomination on this, and it might be that Dante knows about that, or that he works with that. I don't know. Yeah.
yeah. Thank you very much. That is definitely something I'd like to look into.
Ah, yeah, interesting. I'm going to do that definitely. Yeah.
I was going to ask, about the Ring of the Dove because it sounded very similar to troubadour poetry.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the connection is there, if there is a connection.
With what poetry you said?
The troubadour courtly poetry.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there is. There it is. The it is said of Ibn Hazm and his because he's kind of a how do you say that? Um, the courtly and troubadour troubadours coming up, that is more of the 14th century and mid-medieval traditions. And of Ibn Hazm, there is kind of a dispute about whether Ibn Hazm and with his poetry in this work, which is of high literary standing, if he is kind of for how do you say that he gave so many cues and that he is one of a pre-state of the troubadour tradition in Muslim Spain and especially going to France through Spain. And the troubadours came in the 14th century through also the French kings reigning over Muslim Spain at that time. And that is at the time of the expellions of Granada and so, yeah. So, yeah, I don't know about that so well, but I can imagine because he the way and his use of Hispano-Arabic yeah, might have influenced at least. Yeah.
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 Yeah, thank you so much for just explaining because um, it was reminding me of troubadour poetry, but knowing that, he might have been forerunner
A
or maybe
predecessor. Yeah, indeed. Yeah. And well, the dispute is of course between two camps. Also, it has to do with the Islamic background, of course, and well, through Muslim Spain, of course, also the ancient, great ancient Greece words, and also through the translate movement from Islamic scholars and Jewish scholars in Muslim Spain. We owe to them all these treasures. So, and besides that, also many other like the body culture and care of the body and beautiful gardening and all kinds of, yeah, well, so far at that time unknown cultural traditions which in Europe, which came through Muslim Spain to Europe. And inside this translation movement and well, the whole current modern view on the legacy of Jewish and the Jewish background of for instance what we owe to the Jewish tradition, where the Islamic tradition is hardly ever mentioned. In this polemic is also this dispute part of. But if you don't take it as at that as that polemical, yeah, a bit problematic, I would say, discussions, then yeah, there are a lot of influences from also from Islamic scholars as well as I think Ibn Hazm is one of them. Yeah, yeah, yeah. What would we do?
If you don't mind, I have one more question.
Yeah,
Um,
please.
and because I don't want to take too much of your time, but I was just going back to hardship and love, and then love as being embodied in something that happens. It's that profane aspect.
Yeah,
Um, and I was thinking that, well, I kind of don't want to go here because it's too contemporary. But the hardship the world is facing right now
yeah,
doesn't have the embodied aspect. And so I think maybe that's increased the hardship because there isn't that outlet of love that can be found when
true,
when people need it.
true. That was also one of my thoughts when I was writing the piece. That um, yeah, there's um, you could say there is a division also in that way. Not only that the gap between rich and poor is bigger than ever because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also there seems to be a division between the people who have their beloved and those who haven't and are in splendid isolation at home behind their um, screens. Um, yes, I and even great part of the world don't have a screen. So yeah, that I agree with you that it is and in that way, yeah, how yeah yeah, and there I don't know so well because I also see, for instance, here where I live, that many people have much more talks with their neighbors than ever, or um, that when you go to the supermarket here in the Netherlands, the shops are still closed. Only the supermarkets are opened, and then people are in one way they are more anxious and yeah, walk left and right and without looking and only this. But on the other hand, people are very friendly and talkative and so and that is not an alternative to the beloved one and the union, um, of course. Mm, well, yeah, at least it is a social depravity of which we feel with contexts we usually don't um, use or yeah elaborate that much. I would say, yeah,
That yeah, that makes a lot of sense because friendship or just being friendly with people is a type of love. Um,
yeah, true.
but it doesn't, like you were saying, um, it doesn't reach the heights of the union of the beloved and the beloved.
That's also the case when we are talking about that the union with the beloved takes you to a spiritual level and brings you um yeah the um yeah being yeah makes you feel that that your being is created and that you have some contact with the creation. I would say, yeah, that is perhaps sometimes in friendship, but it is not with the neighbor. I guess. Yeah,
But yeah, that's very helpful to think through these ideas. And then I think as we've been talking, or in your paper, um, just how hardship forces or pushes somebody to look for love. And I don't know if
Yeah.
that's a correct interpretation or not.
Yeah, that is it. I had I'm also working a lot with students with a refugee background, and there came to my mind when I was writing that um, you know, when we see what Ibn Hazm was able to after all these hardships in the beginning of his life only, um, then because he became 72 years old or something like that, so it was really 28 was the first third of his life, um, and then he had already yeah, this is comparable to what refugee students have suffered and experienced. And then I see them not only studying a full-time graduation uh, or other program in the university, but also they bring up their children and earn money besides to send to their families in their home countries. And well, they have a lot of to think of, but as well they are great illuminators of manuscripts, or they make poems, write poems or whatever. They also have creative sites, and yeah, I find that for me it is amazing, but on the other hand, it is connected, and that is what you really realize when we are talking about it like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, as well with the the bit hardships we have in our lives, and also now, I would say so, in with the pandemic. Yeah, it is also uh, yeah, um yeah, kind of resilience to know and to be aware of um yeah, how we are spiritually connected. That is also a kind of love, I would say. Yeah,
Yeah,
even online.
yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Yeah, and that's something that I was talking about with Dante is um, I think that he would say when your soul is directed as it is should be towards God, it's unification. It's unifying because
Yeah,
God's the creator, and so everybody else, you're connected with everybody else, and you
yeah,
have this outreach and this love towards them as well, and that's proper and good. So
yeah, yeah, wonderful, huh? But were those all your also your thoughts when you were writing your piece? But were you also because it is love's consolation in the context of crisis and consolation, of course. So what
yeah,
were your thoughts?
so my thoughts were not so much on the current crisis when I was writing. Um, let me see. Let me see if I can remember my thoughts. Yeah, I think my thoughts just were on um, the connective aspect of love and that it brings people together. Um, yeah, which language does as well, right? So we wouldn't speak unless we had someone to speak to necessarily.
Mhm.
And a philosopher might disagree with me, and I would acquiesce, of course, to him. Um,
Yeah,
but yeah, this um, just the vision of the world um, that I don't know if it's inherent to the entire medieval cosmos, but at least to Dante of having everything connected, I think has been really lovely for me to see when I read Dante or read other medieval thinkers, just because I feel living in the not even modern, it's postmodern or contemporary world. Everything seems so fragmented. Uh,
Hmm.
and I am grateful for technology, but it also does seem like another fragmentation. You know, I have my online life,
Yeah.
and then I have my embodied life. So there's this split. And so that's what I really appreciated in reading Dante is this just unification of the cosmos and that it's all unified. Um,
Yes. Wonderful.
yeah.
Beautiful, huh? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Beauty is the right word. It is
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah. And when you were just saying that, I was also uh, I had one more question for you as well, because halfway or so you said the philosopher in me um, is willing to give a more um, yeah, well, definition or elaborated definition or so of intellection, and then but we how would you see that? What was this philosopher willing to work out?
Um, yeah, so I don't think that I'm using the term intellection correctly because I was using it to say there are things that we reason through. So we say,
Hmm.
you know, here's the basis, and then we reason from from our first premises up to our conclusions. And that's what Thomas Aquinas would say. But
Yeah,
then I was using the term intellection to say just that aha moment where suddenly everything clicks and you're just like, oh, I get it.
yeah,
And you
yeah,
haven't reasoned to it. It's just, you just see it with your mind. Um, but when I was rereading my paper last night, I was like, you know, I don't know that I'm using this term intellection correctly when I use it for that experience.
hmm.
Um, so I need to do some more research.
And you all, and in the context of Dante, could you, I would say you are right in how you interpret the term intellection. Yeah. um yeah, but you mean in a more um away from Dante, in how intellection is perhaps not so much related to aha, um con, erlebnis, or how you say it. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, it's helpful to know that I'm on the right track with Dante because that's that's what I want to do is just make sure I'm using the correct term that he would use for it.
yeah. And then it is interesting that his human um how do you say, his humanness is also um um narrowing his intellection, and the intellig oh, wow, um how do you say, intelligible um language of intelligibility of language, of the language. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, that is what you explained very well, I think. Yeah,
thank you. Yeah, yeah, and I think he would say that it is limited, but it's not bad.
yeah,
So
good.
anyway, this is
Yeah,
this was really I learned so much. I really
yeah,
appreciate.
me too. Thank you very much. We had a nice, really nice talks, and thank you very much for your contribution. And I really I'm going more diving into these questions we had for each other, and thank you very much.
Well, yeah, and thank you. Actually, before we leave, I was going to ask, what of the Ring of the Dove would you recommend a first-time reader to read? Because summer is coming up, and I would like to read this.
Again, your question is cut into blocks. I couldn't hear it at the whole. Please, could you repeat it?
What part of the Ring of the Dove would you recommend for a first-time reader of it?
Of Hispano-Arabic background, you mean? Oh, this work of Ibn Hazm, the Ring of the Dove, it is very well understandable. And there's another very nice work. It is also of the 10th century. It is how is it called in English? Please let me see that it's the case of the animals against. Oh yeah, the case of the animals versus man before the king of the jinns, and that is of the brethren of purity. It is quite another. It is not from Muslim Spain, but it is from Basra, which is Iraq nowadays. But that is also it is quite it is a very nice story about animals who complain about man, how they are mistreated by humans, and still the humans call themselves the dominants and the owners of the animals, and that is not a correct presentation. The animals plea because of all these slaughters and really bad, well, the whole exposure of the bad things the human beings do to the animals is there in the booklet. And you can find the text also on the internet. And it's also very nice to do with students and work on it. And they all, in the end, they all conclude, oh, I'm becoming a vegetarian now, because it is really horrible. Well, and the clue is interesting, and so it is a nice work. But from Muslim Spain, I would really recommend this The Ring of the Dove. And also in translation is yeah, there is some poetry as well translated. I don't have it here, but I have it in another room. So and you are willing to read something of Muslim Spain, especially?
I would love to. I would love to.
Yeah, yeah. There is also a very nice work, but it is from a Jewish scholar, also in Muslim Spain, and it is called. It is like I don't know how you a frame story. How that the story within a story within a story. How is that called? A frame story?
Yeah, the frame story.
Yeah, and it is by, I will put it in the chat. Oh, let me see. Yeah, here. Also from the early medieval Muslim Spain, and it is called. Let me see whether it is in how it is called in English. The Book of Delight. Yeah, that is also very interesting, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I'm sorry to have
You're
taken you
welcome.
time here at the end, but I really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, no, it's nice that you ask. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for this nice session. And well, maybe we will meet in another session or next year or whatever. And I wish you all good and the best to your graduation studies. And
Thank you.
thank you again.
All right. We'll see you.
Thank you. Bye bye. And also thank you, Robin, for your help and being there.
Yes, thank you. I'm glad you guys had a chance to really hash
Yeah.
things out. It was
Yeah,
lovely.
it was very lovely.
Yes. Well, have a lovely evening, I guess, where you are.
Yes, thank you very much. And you an afternoon.
All right. Exactly.
And thank you very much.
Of
Okay,
course.
bye bye. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Thanks.
you.